A very warm welcome to the 17th Jobs and Skills Insight webinars uh, on the skills for a post-COVID economy. I'm Dixon from the Skills Development Division at Skills Future Singapore, and I'll be your moderator today. Together with me are my colleagues, Gibson and David. I'm excited to see people from different enterprises, schools, and fellow colleagues here with us today. Skills Future Singapore aims to provide Singaporeans with the opportunities for lifelong learning. We believe that skills, passion, and contribution of each and every individual will drive Singapore's next phase of development towards an advanced economy and a more inclusive society. At every stage of your life, you can be sure to find a variety of resources to help you to obtain the skills mastery and make informed decisions to expand your skill sets for professional and career development. Before we start, allow me to go through some admin details. This webinar will take about an hour, and during the webinar, attendees are muted. However, you can post your questions anytime using the Q&A options on your screen. You can also upvote other questions, and we will do our best to address them. Questions that remain unanswered will be answered after the webinar, so don't worry. Our speaker today is Mr. Matt Sigelman, CEO at Burning Glass Technologies, a leading label market analytics firm. For more than a decade, Matt has led Burning Glass Technologies in harnessing the power of data to deliver AI technologies that have helped millions of jobs, to help fill millions of jobs. And today's topic on skills for a post-COVID economy is a timely and pertinent one. COVID-19 redefined the way we work and live. Never has so much uncertainties fall upon governments, enterprises, and people all around the world. As we work towards containing the virus, what will set Singapore apart when we emerge from this crisis is whether we possess the right talents with the right skill sets to navigate the future of work. Now, without further ado, let us welcome Matt, who will share with us some insights to help us ride out the storm and emerge stronger and more ready for the challenges ahead. Okay, over to you, Matt.
Dixon, thank you so much, and good morning to everybody. It's such a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you as well to our hosts at Skills Future for the opportunity to share insights with you this morning. Dixon's framing was exactly right just a moment ago, because on the one hand, we know that there's already been much discussion about how the pandemic is accelerating a series of changes that are going on in the economy today. And at the same time, those changes just as those changes are creating a set of challenges for companies, for workers, for educational institutions to be able to, as Dixon said, to ride out the storm. At the same time, they are creating opportunities. We know that the future of work, so many people like to talk about the future of work is defined not by jobs, but by skills. And we know that the future of work is defined not by geography, but by where the skills are possessed. Burning Glass is lucky to have a unique vantage point on some of these questions. Our work is in essentially mapping the landscape of skills. We collect millions of job postings every day from around the world and thousands in Singapore. We study hundreds of millions of people's career histories, and we've created our own language for understanding talent, for being able to use that to inform companies, to inform educational institutions, to inform government agencies and ministries around the world about where the talent resides, and how skills are changing within jobs, and therefore where the opportunities to get ahead are, where the opportunities are to create the workforce of the future and to create real mobility. And it's work that we're lucky to do, again, both for a lot of the world's largest employers, for government agencies, and for educational institutions all around the world. Here's what all that data are telling us today. If a year ago I had the chance to, the privilege of being able to speak on one of these Skills Future webinars, And at the time, one of the things that we talked a lot about was the idea of a skills gap. There's been a lot of discussion about the idea that there's not enough skill for demand. It seems odd a year later, and with all the displacement that's happened over the course of the pandemic, to still be talking about a skills gap. But the reality is that despite all of the millions of people who have lost work over the course of these last several months, the pandemic is actually making the skills gap worse, not better. And here's why. Because one of the things that the pandemic has done is it's accelerating a set of changes of automation, of hybridization of work. As employers start to hire again, as we expect to see a recovery in 2021, it's been excellent to hear the good news about vaccines and the like. When employers start hiring back, first of all, employers tend to be reticent to hire back once they've cut people. You want to make sure that you can make do. But second, when they start to hire back, they look for people with the future sets of skills that were already hard to find. So essentially, we start doubling down on the places where there are already skill gaps. And so we can expect those skill gaps to persist. But an important first point here is that when we talk about skill gaps, or the skill gap, the definite article is in some ways misplaced. There was never a singular skills gap, but there were lots of skills gap. Here's some analysis of the skill gap in the US, for example, that we undertook for the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation a couple of years ago, and the height of the market when the market was white hot. We found at the same time there were some parts of the economy where there were literally 50% more job openings than there were workers to fill them. In other parts of the economy, there were an excess of talent. And so even in an economy like today's in the pandemic, where there's a lot of displacement, we can see that there's significant points of demand. Now, here's what exacerbates all of that. Because even before the pandemic started, we were seeing a significant level of skill change. We've all heard those breathless headlines about the great percentage of jobs that people are going to be working in by 2030. That 70% of the people people will be working in jobs in 2030 that haven't been born yet. Unfortunately, the data don't corroborate that kind of breathless statistic. But here's what the data say, which is actually in some ways more disruptive and more profound. What we can see here is that there are a range of jobs where, even just looking 10 years back, where up to 40% of the job requirements are different today from 10 years ago. Now, as you can imagine, when you sort of think about a traditional university or polytechnic curriculum and then ask, has the curriculum changed 40% in the space of 10 years? Generally, the answer, unfortunately, in most parts of the world is no. And so what that says is that increasingly, people are going to need to be able to acquire new skills on the fly. That's why the whole world looks to Skills Future as an example of a place which has created a world-class infrastructure for helping people to acquire skills on the fly. So this, by the way, is analysis from an economist at Harvard named David Deming, who's done a lot of analysis in our data, seeing just how fast those skills are changing. But here's the more interesting thing. Because when we normally think about skill change, we are thinking about, and that fast pace of dynamism, we're really thinking about it really being something that grows out of tech change. So technologies change, stacks change, and therefore people need to master those new technologies. There's certainly some portion of that which is driving the kind of rates of change that David documented in our data. But in some ways, the bigger phenomenon is what you're seeing here. Here's two sets of jobs that are both involved in the data economy. Accountants and data scientists. Now, accountants, by the way, it's an interesting comparison because accountants were the data scientists of the 19th century. Before the Industrial Revolution, most firms were run out of the gold in a proprietor's purse. You didn't need abstruse skills like long division. You just you counted out gold. So all of a sudden, the Industrial Revolution, everyone needed accountants. It was like being the data scientists of today. But I compare these two not just because of their epoch. An accountant needs, well, no surprise, a lot of accounting skill. A data scientist, you say, okay, well, needs data skills. Well, yeah, she needs data skills. Actually, she needs programming skills even more intensively, but then also a lot of business skill. It turns out that data scientists need to not just be able to run numbers, but to relate them back to business problems. When you look at programming skills plus data skills plus business skills, that's a lot of different hats that aren't normally worn on the same head. We call this the hybridization of jobs. And what we're seeing is that it was already a pronounced feature of the landscape before the pandemic. Here on the left, you can see the sets of new jobs that have been created through this hybridization. Things like data scientists, where a decade ago there were only 150 of them. Last year, almost 50,000. But you can see the much bigger scope of transformation happening on the right, which is not how many data scientist jobs there are, but how many jobs look for data science skills. And that's grown by almost fourfold over the last several years. And the number of occupations likewise grown more than threefold over the last several years. And so that is a much bigger scope. And if you look here, which is to see a specific example of how this bears out with regard to, for example, programming skills, coding skills. You look at top earning quartile jobs, about spot on half of them now are occupations that require significant percentage of openings require coding skills of various kinds. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean that half of top earning jobs are tech jobs. These are marketing jobs. These are life science jobs. These are finance jobs that increasingly want people who know how to code. It's also worth bearing in mind that top earning quartile sounds highfalutin, but it's actually usually what I think most people on this webinar would consider to be a solidly middle class lifestyle in the 21st century. So when we map out what are the kind of intersections of skills that are bearing out, we're seeing an intersection of big data and analytics, where on the left you can see sets of skills that are rapidly in demand within a range of jobs, then also new roles that are being created through those intersections. Similarly, the intersection of design and development, sales and technical expertise, disruptive digital technologies, evolving compliance and regulatory landscape. One other key facet of this, which shapes the notion of how, of the kind of workforce we need, is that increasingly these sets of jobs that are the most hybridized are also the ones that are most human. So in other words, the jobs that are most tech-enabled, the most data-driven jobs are actually the jobs that have the greatest demand for human skills. As you can see, those jobs have double the demand for collaboration skills, almost 4 times the demand for creativity skills as other jobs, 50% greater demand for research skills, the list goes on. And naturally enough, because they are more human, they also are less vulnerable to automation. So this is a really important observation, because it says that as we think about the talent that we need as companies, the talent that we need to develop as educators, the talent that's going to set Singapore apart in the 2020s and beyond, is going to be the ability to integrate technical skills with human skills. Now, when we think about these kinds of new combinations of skills, you can imagine whenever you think of it like a Venn diagram, when you take two sets of skills and you try to combine them, all of a sudden you're looking for sometimes a very small intersection. And that makes jobs hard to fill and expensive to fill. Look at here the example of marketing manager jobs. Marketing manager jobs around Singapore pay about $5,000 a month on average. But if you want your marketing manager to be able to manipulate customer data and therefore have basic database skills like SQL, that marketing manager is not making $5,000 a month. She's making $9,300 a month. So we can see, and you can see that bear out in a range of other occupations as well. So inherently, what we're talking about, when we started talking a few minutes ago about the skill gap, inherently, when you see these kinds of combinations, that's exactly how you start to see skill gaps emerge. Now, all of this is happening in the back, with the backdrop of the pandemic. All this was happening before the pandemic, and the pandemic has had a breathtaking pace of change in the market. Here you can see the industry complexion of demand for various occupations has changed. But even more interestingly, across a range of jobs, both those which are highly professional jobs like the top left and bottom right, product managers and actuaries, then also in a range of technical, vocational type jobs, blue collar jobs like production technicians or insurance claims clerks, where if you look at the skills that were in demand in those jobs, inside those jobs before the pandemic and then over the last, more recently, what you're seeing here is some very pronounced shifts in what's in demand. Take a look at actuaries, bottom right of this page. Actuaries have always been involved in doing essentially computational math at scale. All of a sudden, since the start of pandemic, everyone wants those actuaries to know statistical programming languages like R. Literally doubled the demand of that over within those roles over the course of the pandemic. Likewise, Power BI and data science, be able to program in Python up 62%. Basic statistical knowledge, insurance claims knowledge way down because those have become table stakes because basic things like accounting are no longer as significant to having somebody who can really actually apply machine learning into that role. So you're seeing dramatic changes. Again, that's true of a professional role like actuaries, but insurance claims clerks, there's been almost a tenfold increase in demand over the course of several months in the ability for those people to act not just as clerks, but almost as mini underwriters, if you will. Those are very profound changes. And they're profound not only because not only the companies who all of a sudden have a very different need, which may depart from the workforce they have, but it's relevant, but it's very profound for people who are working in those fields who suddenly need to acquire new skills. And as you can see here, a range of different roles, even within, for example, the world of tech, where we assume everything is changing fast, there are some sets of jobs which have been changing much faster than others. And it's important to be able to pinpoint exactly which ones those are. Take the example here on the far left, clinical data managers, which is a job which has had a dramatic pace of change, surprisingly enough, as more of healthcare has become automated. And you can see here, what are the sets of skills that are changing or arising, which are declining. When you think about how you develop a learning program to keep those, to bring people into that field, but also to keep those roles to keep people who are already working in the field from obsoleting themselves. There's sets of skills that are key. As you can see, when you look at, you can see both a set of analytical and data and technical skills that are rewriting non-technical work. Here, for example, if you look at analysis skills, the share of marketing jobs that needed them went from 1 in 12 in 2013 to 1 in 8 in 2018. But you're seeing the same thing moving in the other direction. Hybridization works both ways. So you look at a range of technical jobs, which all of a sudden need things like leadership skills. That's gone from, for example, 1 in 4 IT jobs, ICT jobs to 1 in 3 in 2018, from 1 in 71 engineers needing business leadership skills to 1 in 45. So really big shifts going on. Now all of that is sort of broad sets of trends that we're seeing globally, but I think it's particularly relevant to understand that Singapore is already one of the most digital economies in the world. And those jobs and skills that are most technical are the ones that are also seeing the most profound rates of change. And so on the one hand, Singapore is well ahead, but it also means that to stay ahead, one has to continue to be on top of what's changing. So here, for example, we've looked at, created a digital index to understand the level of digital transformation within various kinds of jobs. And as you can see, the jobs which are highest value are also the ones which are transforming the fastest, or put a different way, the jobs as jobs become more and more digitalized, it drives up their cost because inherently you're looking for people with more and more rare set of skills. I said before that Singapore leads the world in digitalization. I wasn't kidding. This is an analysis of the skills required in a range of jobs, in this case, high skill jobs, looking at what percentage of them demand digital skills. You can see that Singapore edges out Canada by a little bit, but significantly above the US, and well significantly above, for example, Australia. But that same dichotomy is also true in what we call middle skill jobs. These are jobs that don't require university level qualification, but require more than a secondary education as well. And you can see those sets of jobs, likewise, most digital in Singapore, even most true in, and actually perhaps most starkly true among low skill jobs, those that don't require post-secondary qualification, mostly digital in Singapore. That has implications in terms of how remotable jobs are, how able they are to be done remotely. But it also is worth sort of just mapping out what are those sets of skills. So on one hand, you can see some foundational skills, but you can also see sets of specialized skills which really define that landscape. On one hand, you'll see a bunch of database skills, ERP skills, enterprise resource planning skills, which are the top of the list in Singapore. But you'll see things like Python, data analytics in there as well, which are quickly moving to the top and therefore rewriting the landscape of demand in Singapore. And interestingly enough, by the way, to draw comparisons with other parts of the world, bottom of the page here, you're seeing the technological skills that are most in demand in the US, where the IoT, the Internet of Things, social intelligence, ops are driving the greatest change. And to look at that in comparison with Singapore, where it's IoT is moving up there, but it's really sort of still about data science. And so worth sort of tracking what are those specific nuances of the Singapore economy and how does that stack up against other parts of the world. It also speaks to, by the way, where there may be opportunities to build on Singapore's strength. Singapore is an economy, it's the green dot here, which has, in the example here, mechanical engineers, has a outsized demand for mechanical engineers relative to a number of other economies, relative, for example, to France or to the UK or Canada. But you can kind of see what's the percentage of those sorts of roles in Singapore that require, for example, things like 3D graphic skills. And is there an opportunity to invest in building those sets of skills, which are differentiating skill in that field, to create a new source of strength? You can see the same thing here in a field like interior design, which likewise, interestingly, is another field which has been rapidly adopting 3D skills and the use of 3D imaging. And you can see in that field, Singapore not only has a high concentration of demand, but also actually is one of the places in the world which has the greatest percentage of roles which are actually demanding interior design skill, 3D skills. That's an opportunity to build on the strengths that's already there. So thus far, what we framed is an awareness of the kind of changes that are going on broadly, the kind of level of skill change that's going on. You can see how that intersects with an economy like Singapore's, where there's already a very fast pace of digitalization, which is going on. And so the question now is, what can we do about it? How do we figure out where the ball is rolling on the field and run to where the ball is rolling rather than where the ball is today? How do we build the skills of the future? And how do we create what Dixon framed at the start of this conversation as a source of strength throughout the decade ahead? So one of the first things in undertaking that analysis of what we can do, what we can build, is to realize that as new technologies are intersecting roles, it's not only saying that those workers need to master those new technologies, but inevitably it actually reshapes the whole role. We were talking a few minutes ago about mechanical engineers. Again, we pointed out that Singapore has a high concentration of mechanical engineers. It's a source of strength for Singapore. On the left, you're seeing a traditional mechanical engineer, the sets of skills that define a traditional mechanical engineer. But if you were to start to take a look at a mechanical engineer working, for example, with vehicle to infrastructure technologies, what sort of skills does she need? A mechanical engineer who's working in autonomous systems, what kind of skills does she need? And what you'll see here is that, again, these are all mechanical engineering jobs. But once you just sort of start intersecting that role with new technologies, all of a sudden everything else changes as well. As you can see, there's very little in common between either of these two jobs, and certainly between either of those two jobs and the traditional mechanical engineer. So it's not enough for us to say, okay, well, in Singapore, we have a good reservoir of mechanical engineering talent. The real question is to understand what are the technologies that may come to intersect that role, to hybridize that role, and do we have the right skills for our mechanical engineers to make sure that they remain relevant and that they aren't obsoleted. That is true not only at the broad talent pool level, but it's true as well at the corporate level as well. Those of you who are from the corporate world, one of the key questions always to ask yourself is, who are the benchmarks? Who are the bellwethers? Who are sort of best in class in any given field? Here's an example of 3 automotive manufacturers, Volkswagen in the center, Chrysler on the left, and Tesla on the right. And you can see on Volkswagen's, here you'll see that their mechanical engineers, what are the skills they're looking for? Project management skills, purchasing skills, competitive analysis, cost analysis, component design. Those are traditional sets of process-driven skills. They're German after all. On the left, you're seeing Chrysler, which has been investing in a fair amount of product design. But then on the right, Tesla, where you're seeing things like Cadia, you're seeing Python as a key skill of mechanical engineers, range of electrical skills. So the question is, if you are, as you think about what's best in class, as you try to figure out what are the kind of transformations your workforce is going to need to undertake, it's very often very helpful to think about who's already leading and what is it going to take to make sure that you're building a workforce which is going to be competitive. That's not only something you have to do with in terms of tracking your tech roles and your most pivotal roles. Here's an example of purchasing people. The analysis that we recently undertook, comparing a whole range of roles at unicorns. These are the billion-dollar startups against Fortune 50 companies and how they define the same roles. We figured if the billion-dollar startups, unicorns, we like to call the Fortune 50s hippos. I can tell you, I think hippos are probably more destructive than unicorns, so I wouldn't necessarily bet against the hippos. But that said, it is very interesting to see what sets of skills each of them over-index significantly relative to the other on. There's a whole other set of skills not on this page, which both of them are asking for in similar levels. But called out here, what are the ones that each of them is asking for out of proportion to the other? Well, you see on the left or on the right rather, in hippos, supply chain managers, purchasing managers need supervisory skills. They need business planning, project management skills, scheduling skills, pretty traditional skills. But what you're seeing here on the left is not just new technologies, but a whole new model of what this job is about. And you know where I see that? I see that in product improvement. When you think about what antennae a company has out to the rest of the world, there are really two. There's your purchasing people, your salespeople rather, who are interacting with customers, and therefore hearing what customers want. And actually your purchasing people are the ones who are dealing with suppliers, who are finding out what's going on. It makes all the sense in the world that you would want your purchasing people to be having a product improvement feedback loop. It makes all the sense in the world that you want them not just to be buying what you need today, but they be building predictive models for the future. But it's a different way of thinking about the role. And so one of the things you have to challenge yourself, you're going to build the workforce you're going to need for the future before you need it, and then you can't find it. One of the things you need to do is start to think about, are there new models of the role of roles, and how do they manifest? How do those new models manifest themselves in new sets of skills which we're going to need? And one of the ways to figure out how to build a future ready workforce is to look at what are the sets of skills which are premium skills in any given role. And you can see across whether we're talking about production supervisors, software developers, marketing managers, or even administrative assistants, there's certain sets of skills that already command market premium, that where you have to pay people more, or they're harder to find. And understanding what those are allows you to build those into your workforce today, to develop your existing workers, and to hire for the right sets of skills that will make you future ready. One of the other things that's key here is being able to think ahead to what is the economy of the future. We look beyond the pandemic, and we're increasingly tracking out 4 key meta trends that we think are going to significantly shape the landscape of demand in the decade ahead. And they're not that hard to actually sort of think about what they are. We talk about the readiness economy, the remote economy, the logistics economy, and the automated economy. Each of them has a set of jobs and skills that underlie them. Just to give an example, the readiness economy. Thomas Friedman of the New York Times likes to make the argument that COVID-19 was not a black swan event, the kind of event that you can't predict, but rather it's a black elephant event. It was the elephant in the room that nobody was paying attention to. Well, guess what? We're all paying attention today. And so you can expect, as an example of these economies, you can expect that companies, industry, and government are going to start to invest in readiness in ways out of proportion to what they've done in the past. That means not just readiness for the next pandemic, but also readiness for physical infrastructure failures, fortifying physical infrastructure, fortifying cybersecurity, being ready for environmental catastrophe, and so forth. All of those are sets of, if you kind of think about that secular trend, you can then think about what are the skills and jobs that are going to be required inside your business, inside the Singaporean economy broadly, to support that economy. The remote economy, similarly, we're all having this I wish I could be in person with you today. We're having this conversation remotely. And of course, there's a set of technical infrastructure for supporting this remotely. And there is also a set of software infrastructure. And there's also sets of jobs that can be accessed. Logistics economy, similarly, manufacturers have come to realize that their supply chains have been vulnerable through the pandemic and are investing more sincerely. The automated economy, similarly, we talked already about some of the automation that's going on through the pandemic. And again, it's just a matter then of mapping out what is going on in each of these economies. I'll put my email address, by the way, up on the screen later on. We're releasing a report on these economies, on the 4 key economies that we think are going to drive demand into the next into this decade, throughout this decade. And please feel free to email me, and I'll be delighted to send you that report when it's released. And here you can sort of see in regard to readiness economy, just play that out, right? So if we say, okay, we're going to need a biotech readiness. What are some of the skills that are growing the fastest with regard to biotech readiness, with regard to cybersecurity, with regard to green tech? And you can look at what are those sets of skills, and you can make sure that if you see that you think that those are technologies or readinesses that are going to impact your firm, how do we make sure that we're building those in? And here, just to dig one level deeper on cyber readiness, here's a framework for understanding the sets of skills that drive cyber readiness. On the one hand, a set of specialized skills, of course, of skills that are core to cybersecurity and cyber readiness, but sets of skills which are then distinguishing skills, which not every cybersecurity engineer, for example, needs, but which create a premium. And then here are sets of skills that are driving particularly fast growth, which are increasingly intersecting a range of roles that we call emerging skills. And those are ones which showed up in very few jobs just a couple of years ago, and now are showing up in many more. And you can see the kind of pace of change. Tracking all of those, creating that framework gives you a sense for, again, how do you run to where the ball is going to roll to on the field, not to where it is? How do you know what skills your workforce is going to need in the future? And therefore, how do you build it today? How do you ready it today so that you have the talent you need before you need it? Part of that is taking a supply chain view to talent. You know, the reality is that most companies have very advanced supply chains for pretty much every commodity that they need, except the biggest factor of production in most companies, which is labor. We tend to think that we'll wait till we need it and then we'll try to hire it. The problem is that the time you want to hire it, so does everybody else. And another problem is this, that inevitably, some of the kinds of we talked before about the hybridization of roles. We're talking about new combinations of skills, which make roles hard to find, because the people who are trained as marketing managers, to go back to an example we talked about before, aren't typically trained in something like SQL. It's right brain people with left brain skill. So inevitably, if you want to be able to have people who are future ready, who have those future skills, you have to start to look now about where are there reservoirs of talent in our organizations, in our economy. We can upskill, we can develop the skills of to move into the places which are going to be of severe demand. So look at the example of a cyber analyst. This is a fascinating analysis that we found. We looked at the key skills of a cyber analyst. We found that in many companies, there's significant overlap with people who are working as risk analysts in treasury. Cyber and treasury, not a combination that most of us would think about. But what we found was that a cyber analyst, unlike a cyber engineer, is actually doing a lot of incident auditing, doing process auditing. And there's actually a fair amount of overlap, as you can see here, sets of skills that both of them need, and then certain sets of skills that you'd need to add. Being able to understand that transition allows us to say, wait a second, we can pull in talent, we can fill in the gaps, and we can take advantage of the workforce we already have. We all remember back from our economics classes in university about that whole idea of arbitrage. Buy low, sell high. If you have the opportunity to hire somebody at, let's say, $50,000 a year, and that same person who needs, this is a case of a graphic designer who needs HTML5 skills, you wind up normally paying that person significantly more for the role, just to have those extra skills. It doesn't cost you $17,000 to train somebody in HTML5. It's an opportunity to arbitrage in your own workforce. And when you can do that, what you can do is create escalators for moving talent from one place to another. Here's an example of electrical engineers and organizations, many of which struggle to find people with the combination of technical skills and management skills for engineering managers. Well, what would you need to add to an electrical engineer to help her become an engineering manager? And when you take the view of the skill genome of each, you can define what are the skills that are in the gap between the two roles, and you can train to that craft. You can create your own talent pipeline. The key is to focus. And when you focus, you need to figure out what are the skills that are going to be the most valuable. And those are, we've created this framework here, which is helps you sort of think about what are the skills that are hardest to fill and what are the skills that are already projected to grow. In this case, this is a set of data science skills. Remember, we were talking earlier in data science is all growing so fast, but yet even in the field of data science, there's some skills which are truly disruptive. They're already hard to fill, and we're projecting that they're going to grow even faster. And so if you can focus, even in a high growth field like this one, if you can identify those disruptive skills, invest in those, you will prevent disruption to your business. You will prevent disruption to your workforce. And you can make sure that your people don't become obsolete. So I just want to conclude by building on that notion. When it comes to having the talent that you need, it's not a numbers game. It's a skills game. 1 million available wait staff won't help you fill a single cybersecurity opening. So the question is, where are the talent pools that you can build up from? What are the specific skills that will activate that talent? And when you can create a workforce which is more flexible, which is more future ready, and which is more equitable. I'd be delighted to take your questions. And again, if anyone would like a copy of this, they'll be distributed, or feel free to write me directly. And likewise for that report on the 4 economies that are coming up.
All right. Thank you, Matt, for the great sharing on skills for a post-COVID economy. So for the audience, if you have any burning questions, please feel free to post them by clicking on the Q&A button in your Zoom. Okay, so now we'll take questions from the audience in the Q&A window. So first, from Angeline, she would like to clarify if what exactly hybridized jobs and skills refer to. Are they just simply tech related, or is there another way to define what hybridized jobs are and skills are?
It's Angeline, it's a great question, and thanks for asking it. I think what I would frame here is this. Hybridized sets of hybridization is really the intersection of skills of sets of skills which are kind of orthogonal to one another, which don't tend to combine together in a traditional definition of a role. So I'll just jump back to earlier in the presentation where one of the things I shared was some examples of different intersections of roles. So for example, we talked about the intersection, here we go, of design and development. Right, that's what are sets of skills that are involved in that intersection, and what are sets of roles that are being created, like UI, UX designer, and what's the kind of rate of growth. Some of these things are, many of them are indeed technical or involve data or digital skills, coding skills. But as you can see at the bottom here, you're seeing, for example, regulatory skills, which are increasingly showing up in a range of sets of skills that previously, and sets of roles, which previously didn't exist, or where you're seeing sets of significant growth. So for example, you can look at role like skills like environmental compliance. There's been almost 50% a year level of growth, 50% growth rather over the last 5 years. So a tremendous pace of growth in demand for environmental compliance skills as we create a greener world. It's not surprising to see those sets of skills showing up. Similarly, you'll see a set of roles, clinical research managers, IT auditors, which increasingly need to have the compliance and regulatory sets of skills. So I think the key here is realizing where are sets of skills showing up that are very different from the sets of skills. And this is why it is so important to think about from a learning perspective. because from a skill development, from an upskilling, from a reskilling perspective, we realize that there are sets of skills which which a worker's not going to learn on the fly. If you are a marketing person, and just keep running with that example of a marketing person who now needs SQL skills. A marketing person, just in the course of doing her job, doesn't learn SQL. It's a very different set of skills from everything she's done before. And so for that marketing, for your marketing manager to be able to manipulate customer data, she's going to need to be able to acquire new skills. And that's, by the way, again, why national resources like Skills Future are so critical, because it's not just a few people who need to be able to reposition themselves. Pretty much every worker is going to need to acquire new skills, and many of those are skills that won't just come by working.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Matt. Okay. So we have another questions from Delphinium. She's asking that whether your research findings are also reflective of what is faced by SMEs, and what can we do to bridge the gaps, the skills gaps of SME employers, and then because basically their business are still struggling with P&L and adoption of digital skills. So your comments?
Delphinium, it's likewise a great question, and I would say, here's what I would point out there. SMEs are particularly relevant in this conversation because, well, on the one hand, SMEs aren't always necessarily on the skill forefront. It puts all the more pressure on them to be able to keep up, because organizations that are relatively small don't necessarily have a training department. They don't necessarily have training resource. And yet for them to be able to compete with larger peers, to be able to be suppliers to large organizations, they will be under increasing pressure. On the other hand, SMEs play another very important. So on the one hand, this creates an imperative on SMEs that's difficult for them to carry, frankly. But on the other hand, it creates, and they are playing a very important role, because people who are, if you are university qualified or the like, then there's lots of organizations that it's relatively easy for you to find a job within. But SMEs play a very important bridge role in being able to take people who are maybe middle skill workers or the like and give them opportunity. And so, we think about creating a Singaporean society that is not only where we're not only developing a higher and higher level of skill, but we're creating more and more mobility within society. SMEs are where people start. SMEs are what give people the ability to move up. And it's critical to be able to support SMEs with the right infrastructure and resource to help them be competitive.
Okay, and the next question from Sharon. She's asking how can we encourage employees to learn besides providing bite-sized learning, e-learning platform and all that, and what other avenues or tips can you share to encourage employees to learn and to have them understand what's the importance of lifelong learning as you have advised?
So Sharon, thanks for the question, and what I would suggest here is this. A lot of learning platforms, a lot of learning investments have been really very focused on just employee engagement. And I think that's a little short-sighted, because what we need to be able to do is to give employees a clear map to where opportunity is. You can't just say, hey, Matt, we think you should learn. Wouldn't it be good if you learned something? Or here's a library that's open to you. People are busy. People have a lot of responsibilities, both in their work and outside of work. If we want them to be dedicating personal time to learning, we need to give them a good, compelling reason for doing so. Saying to somebody, look, Matt, I'm currently paying you $5,000 a month. I want to pay you $6,000 a month. Here's the skills that, here's the job that I can move you in. If you could learn these skills, here's how I can move you up. Let's create those kinds of maps. It's work that we've done, for example, and with organizations like Amazon, like Walmart, like Salesforce.com, where we created those maps. And when people can see what learning will do for them, what opportunities it opens up for them, then people become much more engaged, much more interested in engaging around that learning. And so that's a big responsibility of employers, to be able to create and provide employees with that map to where what their future can hold and how skill development will move them there.
Okay, and then there's one question from Anderson. He's asking, it appears that it's cost effective to add new skills to existing staff, but there's always resistance, whether from the employer or from the employees, to learn new skills, especially those that's quite different from what they are used to. So, from your perspective, would buying the new skills and augmenting to existing be more feasible then?
So, here's what I would say there. What I'd say that when we give people a framework of skill, first of all, I just want to acknowledge the point that has been made, which I think is exactly right, which is that there's a lot of reasons why people don't learn. And aren't necessarily motivated to learn. There's an old expression that when it comes to learning, life gets in the way. And I think this ties very much back to the previous question. Life gets in the way of eating green leafy vegetables. Life doesn't get in the way of things that people are motivated to do. And so I think, when we think about investing within when we think about how we can invest, what's going to make a workforce be willing to take this on? It's both giving visibility to workers, but it's also thinking about how do we grow with people. We've been doing a bunch of work recently with Harvard Business School for the Gates Foundation, looking at how people achieve mobility in their lives. And what we've been finding is that, first of all, we've been impressed just by the sheer extent to which people move up. We didn't appreciate coming into the study just how much people move upward within their careers, even people who are starting out in poverty. That's encouraging and it's good news. What we found, though, is that some companies do a very good job of holding on to people as they move up, and often other companies who are in the very same industry do a much less good job, where people tend to leave them. And so the key is being able to figure out, how do you move up with your employees? And it's a very different way of thinking about the problem. We're used to sort of thinking about, well, should I invest in this person? I might invest in them and they might leave. But actually, what happens more often is that people will move up. They just won't move up with me. Inherently, as they move up, they're becoming more and more valuable workers. So I think it's really about creating the right motivation, about giving the right transparency. It's about giving very efficient resources, because likewise, if what we're trying to do is say, okay, well, I'm giving you a tuition benefit to go and study for a master's degree. Well, a master's degree takes a long time. But can I give people the ability to learn skill by skill and to achieve value, help them accrue value as they acquire each new skill?
Right. So indeed. So just want to share that I mean even in SSG, I'm really one of the beneficial of having given the opportunity to upskill myself. So currently I'm going through upskilling to become a data scientist. So I think I do see this happening in Singapore and especially in government agencies. All right. Okay. So next question from Joanna. She asked. Okay, her question is okay, the inclusion of those skills that you mentioned in your slides takes time, right? Students, whether from university or polytechnics, will still be coming up to market without all these skills and in work in the curriculum. So even for graduates in the next few years. So any advice on how to acquire this, how this skills acquisition can be accelerated? Otherwise, without these, yeah, otherwise more without this will be entering markets.
So I think the question is this. So just to make sure I'm understanding the question effectively, there are sets of skills which students are going to need, and so I think the question here is, how do we make sure that students are learning the right sets of skills? Just to make sure is that the question?
Yeah, basically how can skills acquisition of such skills mentioned in your slides be accelerated?
So I think this is also a place where it's so important that we are doing a good job with institutions to make sure that they are tracking the market as well. And that they're making changes both at the program level and at the curriculum level. The reality is that most academic programs don't change all that much from year to year, both in terms of what programs we offer and in terms of what we teach within those programs of study. And so when we can create the right sets of programs, where we can say, okay, are there sets of programs that we no longer need? And then similarly, are there ways that we can say, are we teaching the right things inside those programs, where we can put those things together and create a lot more value and more relevance? One of the things that's really important here is this. We tend to think about programs of study being places where, we're really either have an academic education or you have a vocational education. And the reality is that you need to be able to provide both. Somebody can learn computational thinking. Well, how does that manifest? So that there are timeless skills, but they manifest in very timely skills. Educational institutions, in order to create to unlock careers, high value careers and career mobility for students, need to be able to provide students with a framework for navigating to high value careers with the timely and timeless skills that will help serve students well for the whole arc of their entire careers.
All right, thank you, Matt. We still have a couple of questions remaining, but unfortunately, we are running out of time. But not to worry, those questions will be answered offline, and then we will send all the answers to all participants, right? So, okay, basically, we have come to the end of this webinar session. We are very grateful to have Matt join us this morning and to share his insights and address some of the questions posed. I hope you have a good takeaways from this session. We also like to invite you to join us in our subsequent webinars as shown in the screen here. So as we will be sharing on different topics every month. So before we close, I would like to invite you to take a 2-minute survey. So your feedback, which will be kept confidential, is very important to us and will help us to improve our future webinars to serve you better. So do scan the QR code on your screen right now. And if you are interested to find out more about the initiatives that Skills Future has, please refer to the links to the enterprise portal for jobs and skills on the screen. Okay, today's webinar session will be hosted on my Skills Future portal, SSG LinkedIn page, and YouTube channel. The slides will be sent to you in the next few days, together with all the questions to those remaining, with all the answers to those questions remaining today. So once again, my name is Dixon, and together with Gibson and David, we would like to thank Matt and the Burning Glass Technologies team for their utmost support. So meanwhile, stay safe and see you soon.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.